She was elected to 113 Congress in New Mexico's 1st Congressional District. I'd like to welcome Michelle Lujan Grisham. Congresswoman, welcome.
Thank you. As always, I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. Last time you came, you came as a candidate.
I did.
We're really lucky to have you back. Let's talk a little bit about the immigration reform, because that's on everybody's mind right now. The president's proposal, give us a little feedback on what you think about his specific proposals. I know because he outlined certain things there.
Well, the nice part is, and maybe if you don't mind, taking a step back, which is, I actually, within the first month or so of being elected and being in office, I was able to participate with only about 8 other members of both the House and the Senate to talk to the president about immigration reform. And President Obama was very clear that that was one of his #1 priorities, and he wanted it done in the 113th Congress. Now, in that meeting, of course, you had the Senate and Senate leadership, including Senator Menendez, saying it is our #1 priority, and you had the House saying, well, it's one of our top priorities, and these were members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus talking about, we've laid a groundwork. So here's what we are today. You got the House, the Senate, and the President all saying 113th, primarily because the longer we wait on this issue, the more harmful it is to families, and given the fact that the federal government, even though you've got a president, right, who wants immigration reform, that we're still deporting people, and we're separating families, and a lot of young dreamers, no other country is their own, are being deported away from their family. It's a very heart-wrenching, terrible situation that cannot be undone unless we do immigration reform. And so we had the Gang of 8, those senators who are meeting in secret, and they were meeting in secret primarily because keeping bipartisan support means making sure that people feel like there is no public penalization for an open discussion about what really needs to occur. And so that's what they did. And now we've got a bill, and the bill in the Senate, the debate started today. The bill in the Senate, so our first effort to get to debate it, deals with these following things. So we know that Dreamers have a immediate resident protection and can be full citizens if they meet the requirements, which by and large for Dreamers is that there's been no criminal activity or problem. And in 5 years, they're good. For their families, we've got sort of a 10+3, and I think that that's going to be a major issue that gets debated about whether or not that's a 13-year total time frame, whether that's going to
it takes 13 years to get the
full citizenship. And the reason is it's really 10 years, and then it's by the time that you've met all of the requirements, you pay a penalty, $500, and you got to deal with your back taxes, and you got to show that work history. You do get a resident status or protection, so you can't be deported if you meet the other requirements and you're not engaged in criminal activity. And you can travel across the United States. You don't have to be in the shadows. There are worker protections and there are business protections for workers. So all that's great. But those last 3 years to get to citizenship, the issue, as I understand it, is we've got such a backlog for people who immigrated here correctly and have been waiting, didn't break any laws, that there's an issue about equity and fairness. And of course, something that I want to debate is why aren't we investing more in our immigration system so that that's more meaningful? It is broken. I mean, nobody should have to wait. I mean, again, this is not a week-long process. Exactly. Immigration issues are significant. We have to balance the interests of the country with recruiting people in and protecting citizens. But the other is 10 years, 13 years, 15, 20 years, people shouldn't be asked to wait so long. And I think it's an issue about investing in our immigration system. The bill also contains measures for increased border security. And I think that that's one of the negotiation efforts. And I would certainly, I'm not going to derail this package because it's important to me to have it. But earnestly, we've got more money in border security than we've had ever in this country. And
when Reagan did the amnesty, 3 million people received their legalization at that point. They had a border security clause in there, which never no one ever followed through it. This is what the argument on the right is, that this same thing will happen again. So you have 11 million people in the system currently that are undocumented. How do you bring those in? And if you because some on the right are calling it de facto amnesty right now.
They are.
So, and Rand Paul is one of them from Kentucky. He said, we already have de facto amnesty. Let's just give them visas, bring them in the system. So we don't even have to talk about going through the full process of. So there's a lot of conversation. I understand some of the points that the right makes, because some of it does make sense, but then some of it is a little bit out of touch with what the reality on the ground is.
Well, and true, and the whole debate about amnesty and what happened with the 3 million under Reagan's presidency, but then we're not dealing with this country's immigration system in total. Mm-hmm. We need to have a dialogue about open, closed, or something in the middle. And we want something in the middle. I mean, some of this country's best talent are individuals that we recruit from other countries who are educated here and participate here in incredible innovation. We don't want to block ourselves from those opportunities, but by the same token, we don't want an environment where we can't manage the number of folks who seek better economic value or amnesty in this country. And those debates, as it relates particularly to the 11 million families, I think are really important. And today, 11 million people in the shadows, spending all of this money in a way that's really nefarious and is breaking these families apart. Correct. Doesn't make any sense. And with the number of dreamers born coming here as toddlers or infants.
Because there's no fault of their own. They were
this makes no sense. So this is a little bit different from the situation that Reagan faced, and the economy between Mexico and the United States has shifted. So this is really an opportune time to deal with the folks who are here and then have a broader discussion about immigration of the long haul, so we don't keep having this issue every decade or so about what we're going to do, and really look at the economies of the states on the border of Mexico.
The fear on the right is that the minute you say legalization and path to citizenship, is a whole bunch of people that will line up past the 11 million that are already here. So that's their fear, that you will create this hysteria for people wanting to come into the country after this is, even if there's a word of amnesty. That's why they don't even want to use the word amnesty anymore, because it's become such a taboo subject, you know, when you say amnesty. So the thing is, on a ground level, you're dealing with human beings that are living on the shadow, like you said. How do we deal with that in a humane manner, because they are productive members of society, right? Whether they're living in the shadows or not. They have family members, children, and there's some that are already in our military, serving the military. They want to take the Pledge of Allegiance. They're very patriotic.
That's right.
So how do we deal with all these separate issues there? Stalling it, and I think kicking it down the road, which is what some are suggesting on the right, that let's not deal with it right now. With the bombing, the way it happened, when it happened, they say, well, let's discuss how the visa system works. So do you have anything as far as like what they're working on with the visas?
Well, for me, this is the issue. I mean, all of it needs to be dealt with. How we're issuing visas, what our checks, and whether or not we've invested enough in the State Department to really do both due diligence and to have a process where things are moving. And today, where we keep cutting federal government and we're not investing in any of those public services, it becomes a little bit haphazard. But also the notion that this incident or any other tragic incidents in the country is enough to say we're going to stop a productive path.
Because they want to put the brakes on it. At that point, I disagreed with that.
I do too. And the longer we wait, the more complicated this problem becomes. And it's not going to solve every issue. And the big thing that you'll see both the Senate, the House, and the President too, is you have to prove that you were here before 2012. So it is not an open invitation for everyone to come to this country while we figure out exactly what the process is. That tells me that we're protecting law-abiding individuals who are here, that we're protecting those dreamers who are here through no fault of their own, that we recognize how we've got a deal between, you know, much of the unions and commerce, and now we're close to a deal with the agricultural community.
Yeah, because they're concerned about it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
They're concerned because they have a legitimate reason there, because they have to bring food to the table. They're wondering, well, what do we do with the ones that are here? And how, isn't that where I think where the talks broke down a little bit, where they said, well, it's fine with the individuals that are here, but what about those that haven't come in yet? they're trying to apply for guest worker program. What do we pay them and stuff? This is where the problem is.
And to make sure that, and I will tell you that in the Senate version, there's clear language about prevailing wages, because what you don't want to do is say, okay, our guest worker program, we're going to undervalue that labor. And then we get a different system for people who aren't on a work visa, who are in a protected residency status, who can then work as part of that and make their pathway to citizenship. We have to be very careful, and the way that you equalize that is by not allowing these tiers and second-class individual status creep in this country so that we're taking advantage, but also maximizing our opportunities, because we need people in this job market. Correct. And what states have shown is this notion that there is a dearth, that there's so many people looking for work in this country, that if you just disallow anybody in a guest worker program to work, that you're fine. What happened is that we had crops that weren't picked and spoiled in the field, and we've got real trouble. So I think we've proven to the country that there are certain jobs that Americans, for whatever reason, are not taking. They won't do.
They won't do it.
So recognize that as your issue, and then fairly and equitably, humanely invest in a job market that is willing and able and deserves the kind of respect and protections for doing that work that this country should provide them, as long as they're meeting those requirements.
Exactly. Yeah. On the high skill labor, you have individuals that are PhDs in computer sciences. The H-1B.
Doctors, engineers, you bet.
They always return to go back home.
Not always, but more often than not.
Quite a lot. I mean, I've seen that lately, where because of the economy cooling off, they're heading home. So I think there's got to be ways to keep them here, encourage them to get into business, because they're very entrepreneurial. I mean, a lot of them are, not all of them, but they like to stay here. So I think there's a lot of issues there, and if you start looking at them issue by issue, it makes it very complicated. I totally understand how the right feels at times, because it becomes overwhelming. They have no incentive there, because a lot of these individuals vote Democrat, and so it gets into all these areas where both parties don't want to deal with it at times.
They do, but you know, and there are political realities here. But the longer we wait to do this, the more complicated this will become, and it prevents us from dealing with those visas for high-tech talent and innovation in this country. It stalls people who are trying to come and appropriately immigrate to the United States. And so the longer that we just pretend that this is not a problem, then we'll never get to solving those issues. And there's a huge backlog just on those requests.
Right, yes.
And so I feel much better about the Senate debating the issue, having the House has got a bill that's ready, the President's got a bill that could be dropped, so that
the House has its own bill, correct?
We have our own bill.
And then the President has his own bill.
Right, but all we've seen debated and seen the details of is the Senate bill.
Correct, yeah, because they're the gang of it working on it.
That's right.
And I think they might be able to get it done if they don't feel like they need to stall it. Because right now the talks are, well, let's stall it for another few more weeks or a month or a few more months. Because like I said, the incentive on the right is not there, because they feel that these individuals coming into the system don't vote Republican anyhow, so why should we? What was the incentive there?
But it's hard for me.
Going back, I didn't want to go back to that, but that's.
But as a politician, the reality is that if you want to have something in common with the community that you may be out of touch with, then don't be out of touch with that community. Recognize what's going on with these families, what these hardships are, that it's tearing whole communities apart, not just families. Correct. That it's become an issue for all of the border states. Yeah, that we're spending money in places that don't make any sense in an environment where we should be investing in jobs and infrastructure in this country and building our economy. If I were a Republican, and look at Rubio, I would make it very clear that this is a national priority. I'm going to take a leadership role. I'm going to develop a relationship with this community. As a politician, that's a good thing to do. Taking for granted that it's all going to be Democratic or it's all going to be Republican if we see Republican leadership on this issue in the Senate just means that you have individuals who don't have the respect for or the courage to learn about issues that they may not have been as engaged in or weren't their priorities. I think this is good for both sides to address. McCain
had about 31%. George Bush, the last one, who had 40% of the Hispanic vote. Romney got 27%. So they're seeing this decline there, and they're saying that, well, this is not going to work out for us. It may become like California, where if we legalize and put all these individuals on the pathway to citizenship, we're going to lose the nation for good. And this is how the thinking is on the right. I understand some of those fears because it really comes down to getting elected for some of them. So there's a panic there. There's this incipient panic that, oh, well, we're not going to be able to deal with this thing if they ever come into the fray.
But your point about the 27% is perfect because for Governor Romney, because the reality is if you don't do immigration reform, that's where you're going to be heading into an increasing number of Hispanic voters. Actually,
you know, it's inaccurate in some ways, even though he received 27% of the vote. They took another poll with Obama voters, and they said, would you, if the Republicans were to come out with a reform on a comprehensive level, would you vote? 40% of them said they will actually try to go Republican at that point. So there's a defect in that kind of a thought process there.
And that's what, see, that's what I think as well. I mean, I appreciate that you do your homework because it makes the conversation so much more exciting. But the reality is that if you get to the issues, the substance, you get to the voters, irrespective of what party you are. And people, I think that what the major issue for Congress right now is that most voters, bipartisan, are tired of Congress's inability to get things done. And even if you disagree with a vote I make or something that I'm doing, the notion that I'm working hard and I believe in what I'm doing and I'm being thoughtful carries a whole lot more weight with voters than whether or not we're always on the same side of the issue. We want Congress to work and be productive. We want Congress to get something done. I do too.
Exactly. And eventually we're going to have to do the right thing as a nation. I know the right and the left, sometimes we don't agree, but when it comes down to it, I think we always do the right thing. And I think the Republicans would realize that at one point. They're going to have to do it because these are human beings we're dealing with. We're not dealing with numbers or statistics, or eventually there's a person on the ground that is a family member, a father, a mother, grandparent, a son or daughter, someone serving in the military.
These parents who come to me, who've had their 18-year-olds or 19-year-olds deported and separated from their family.
It's traumatic, correct.
It is heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
And this is not the notion that our country would continue to do that. And of course, you know, I've got folks who will debate me and say, well, this person broke the law and that's why they became a target. That's how they got picked up. This 19-year-old was, you know, sitting at a stoplight with a brake light out. And we just took them away from their family and their parents. A productive college student, somebody was volunteering their time, somebody was helping clean up community parks. This is the person who we separated from the only place they know as home and away from their parents. And it's heart-wrenching for me. And we get these stories every day.
I have a lot of Republican individuals, friends, acquaintances that we speak to regarding this situation. There's a genuine fear there. And I see that in their eyes when they're actually talking about it, building a fence. It's very real, like you have to build this fence or I think we're going to lose this country to a lot of immigrants from the South. Moving on from this subject, I think we covered a lot about immigration. Let's go on to the budget a little bit. We'll change gears. The President proposed a certain set of proposals on his blueprint there. Talk a little bit about this. I know the Social Security and the Medicare, a lot of Democrats didn't like it. Do you have any, I'm sure you have your opinion on what the cuts that he was talking about vis-a-vis the Social Security and Medicare specifically, I think. Was there anything that you wanted to?
Well, yeah, so again, if you can stand me in this program, I really appreciate it. But just backtrack a little. So we have not gotten very far on budgets as a Congress, but this year we're at least passing budgets out of the House at least, and we're getting the continuing resolution debates coming out of the Senate, so we don't have a government shutdown. But so for the first time in a long time, you've got a Senate budget, you got a House budget, now you've got the President's budget, and the President's budget was just debated in the Budget Committee, of which I'm a member. And what you raise is that the President tried to balance some of the Republican issues and interests with deficit reduction and looking at the national debt and recognizing that we need to do something about that. All right, and in doing so, he's agreeing to do some entitlement reform, and his position is that he's only doing the entitlement reform, the agenda items that Speaker Boehner and the Republican Party in the House have identified as the only ways in which their party will consider having more revenue come in so that you've got a balanced approach. Revenue coming in, closing corporate loopholes, making sure that those funds are available for economic infrastructure investments and education, healthcare, bridges and roads and hospitals, and controlling entitlement costs on the other end. And I think that the president should be applauded for that effort, because that's what we've been, all of us, particularly folks, I think, bipartisan, who really see the value of moving this country off the dime here on budget and appropriations. I'm a little disappointed that we've narrowed the debate on entitlement reform again, that we're going to deal with.
It came down to the entitlements.
It does. It comes down to eligibility or benefit. Eligibility or benefit. What about delivery? What about how these whole programs work? There's plenty that we can do that bends the cost curves in healthcare and Medicare, and you could remove the earnings cap limitations in Social Security. There are things that we can do that incentivize those systems to do better, and the truth is that Social Security is not the reason we have a federal deficit. So Democrats are a bit concerned that this was the wrong approach to dealing with entitlements, but not that we shouldn't be having earnest discussions about that.
Weren't you surprised at his proposal, though, because there's cuts to Social Security and Medicare?
The chain CPI, I was disappointed. In fact, if anybody watched C-SPAN and my comments on the Budget Committee, I was very clear that we're taking a huge cut out of Medicare Part B, which is one of the things it does is home health and hospice. And if you want people to get out of the hospital and not return to the hospital, those are very cost-effective benefits, but they're looking at the growth in those areas. Exactly. And so they just look at it from a kind of a unit cost. We've got too much money going out, take that out. Now we've got more money to spend in Medicare, without saying, what are the reasons? What can we do to make it more cost effective? Why? And the governor, I mean, the president did also put in rebates and negotiating better prescription drug prices, but I'm not happy really about the chain CPI and the
I was
Medicare
a little
chains.
confused on that, because he made that deal with John Boehner last year, and I think he had to stick to that. So I can understand that. But then when you really start to study the budget, there is some flaws there. And I know we don't have enough time to go into all of it. But over the next 10 years, I think he's proposing about 1.8 trillion in savings there. Overall 4.3 trillion altogether when everything is summed up.
And we've already made deficit reduction spending to the tune of about 2.4 trillion. So it's not, and I think that Americans haven't seen that. You know, they don't, although now with sequester, I think they're seeing and feeling the negative effects of bad policy making. But we have been cutting, and what we know in the experience of our European allies and friends and neighbors, that's not working, because there's no growth in their economies, no investments. And for me, I don't know why we have to get things done in 10 years or 15 years. And I've been telling voters that it sounds like this to me. We worry about individual debt in the same way we look at the country's debt. We know that there's got to be a productive ratio between what you owe and what you bring in. But can you imagine if I was helping you or your family and we were doing debt counseling and trying to get you on the right path, that we took your 30-year mortgage and said, you have to pay it off in 10 years. And so we're going to have to double your payments, because that's the only way that you really take the largest part of your debt out of the equation. All that would mean is that nobody could bring in double the revenue to do that. That's the reason you're in that tight spot to start with. You lose your house. So we have arbitrarily said everything has to be done in this window. What we should be saying is reasonable window, reasonable effects on the deficit, taking out as much waste, looking at evidence-based programming, and investing in the growth of the economy. And that over a 20-year period, or so. You know, I don't know what the magic number is, 18 or 26. Exactly, yeah. But every economist in the country, non-partisan, is saying that that's the right recipe for long-term sustainability and success in this country. And so we need to follow that advice in Congress. Yeah.
We're almost out of time here. Hopefully we'll have you back. Maybe we'll talk about some of the other issues as they come up. And you know, maybe, I know the budget thing, they're dealing with it. Now maybe we'll talk about gun control or something next time around.
I would love to. Yeah. Look, we're going to see something come out of the Senate. Yeah. Let's talk about what the House does with that, and let's talk about whether the House takes a leadership role on the gun violence debate. So I appreciate being here this afternoon, and as always, it's really a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, and we'll see what happens with the immigration reform. Hopefully it'll get through. And I hope it does for the 11 million sick. There's a lot of people
optimistic.
there. Yeah.
You know, it won't be a perfect solution, but I'm very optimistic that we're going to do the right thing as a country here.
I think so too. I think eventually it comes down to it. I think Winston Churchill said that too, that eventually Americans always end up doing the right thing. So I think I'll leave it on that note. Well, thank you for coming.
I can't do any better than that. Thank you very much.
I know I was very happy to have you back as our Congresswoman from District 1.
Thank you.
We're out of time, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for watching. So thank you.
Thank you.